Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is projection. It's really fascinating to me how the things that annoy us in other people are often the behaviors or traits or um, actions that we ourselves are uh, participating in, or that we evidence in our own behavior. So it's an interesting phenomena. I think it should be a stimulating conversation, and we'll get started with that in a minute. But first, let's just take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling as you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Today, we're talking about projection. And this comes from a conversation with a client yesterday who was saying that they were having some issues with their spouse because their spouse wasn't filling their notion of what a loving spouse should be, and that they weren't complimentary, and that they didn't give the person I was speaking with enough attention, and that they they felt critical of their spouse, and the spouse was somewhat critical of them, didn't agree with them all the time, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked, well, do you say complimentary things? Do you uh say sweet things? Do you act sweetly? Do you pay attention? And all the criticisms that this person was leveling on their spouse, while they took responsibility for saying, I should just appreciate that my spouse more for their uniqueness, which was true. Despite saying that, what we uncovered was the fact that they were guilty of all the things that they were criticizing their spouse for. And I think that this is very common, that the things we criticize in others, the things that we find objectionable in others, are often things that we ourselves are guilty of. I don't like using that phrase necessarily, but that we ourselves participate in, or that we evidence the same sorts of behaviors. And it's fascinating to me that most often the things that annoy us in others are things that we can, if we turn the lens on ourselves, we can see in ourselves. And it turned out that one of the things was that this person felt that their spouse was critical of them. And I said, well, are you critical of your spouse? And they said, yes. And I said, well, are you critical of yourself? And they said, yes. And one of the nuances of this exploration is that we can actually discover that the things, in terms of the way that others treat us or our objections to the way that others treat us, not only do we tend to treat others in the same way, but we often tend to treat ourselves in the same way. And so when we can be more loving and accepting to ourselves, we tend to be more loving and accepting of others. It's kind of an interesting dynamic, and it is projection. We're projecting on others the perception of our own experience without even realizing it. So when we're little, we're taught how to be in the world and how the world is. We're taught to how to treat others and how to treat ourselves. We're taught that by the way that people treat us. So when our parents are critical of ourselves, we learn to be critical of ourselves and of others. And that becomes, very often, it becomes an unexamined behavior. It just becomes the way things are. And with this person that I was speaking with yesterday, they are very critical of themselves. And they did internalize the criticism from their parents. It's pretty interesting how we do that. I remember years ago when I went away to college, I noticed at one point how much I beat myself up. And I realized that I was no longer in the environment where I was viewed with such a critical eye, where I was receiving criticism from others. And I recognized, oh my gosh, I've internalized. It didn't stop just because I recognized it, but I recognized, oh my gosh, I've internalized this criticism. There's nobody outside to critique me, so I'm doing it. And I did it with a passion, I have to say. And I think so many of us do. And I'm not advocating a lack of self-reflection. I think self-reflection is really, really important and valuable. However, allowing ourselves to reflect from maybe what I would call a meta level, to step up a level, to say, what are those conversations, to make ourselves aware and present to the internal conversations that we have about ourselves, about life, about others. What is that chatter that accompanies us through most moments of our days? I was was reading something about presence and how when we allow ourselves to be present, we gain a freedom of being. And part of this is an awareness, a lack of attachment that we can cultivate to these internalized conversations about self-judgment and judgment of others. You know, when we're judgmental of others, if we turn around and look back at ourselves, we can recognize that we're judgmental of ourselves, or that we are experiencing being judged. It's the old story that when you point a finger at somebody, there are all these fingers pointing back at ourselves. So I'm thinking of our political conversations where we can be very righteous, whatever side of a conversation we're on, we can become very righteous in our knowing, and someone else's stubbornness or narrowness. And what might be useful is to look at how we embody the same characteristics in those situations, perhaps, you know, our own narrowness. So I am participating in a workshop series about constructive conversation, really how to be able to have constructive conversation that are difficult conversations, how to have difficult conversations in a way that allows all parties to maintain our humanness, to be able to come to something through a place of connection rather than expanding on our difference and our separation. And it's really interesting to take this practice on, again, sort of from a meta level, like a level above, to look at the dynamics of a conversation and to look at, well, what's at stake? What are the stakes? What are the feelings? What are the judgments? What's the righteous thinking? And when we get to look at ourselves in that way, by making those inquiries, you know, what judgments am I having? What are the emotions I'm having? What's at stake here? To be observing the dynamics of a conversation from those vantage points and the righteous thinking, like the righteous thinking on my part and the righteous thinking on somebody else's part, like to look at these dynamics somehow just by making those inquiries, new possibilities open up. And this is the kind of self-reflection that serves us to move to the next level, to open up new potentials, to open up new possibilities where new paths forward can emerge. It's really quite alchemical in its way, because just by asking those questions, we get to see ourselves from a different vantage point and maybe release some of the guardrails that were keeping us in a rigid pattern, that we allow ourselves a bit more freedom and flexibility to look at things in a different way, to consider things in a different way. And there's tremendous power in that. We talk all the time about how our reality is shaped, how we literally shape our reality, and that our reality is a projection of our consciousness. And this occurs within interpersonal contexts all the time. You know, if we think that someone has ill intent toward us, obviously we're going to interact with them in a different way than if we consider that they're benevolent toward us, right? If we know that someone is interacting with us from a space, or we feel that they are interacting with us from a space of love and care, we're likely to respond differently than if we believe they're out to get us, right? So we're projecting a perception outward. Now, that's not to say that we don't have awareness on a visceral level, on a bodily level. I'm not saying that we should ignore the signals that we get. Those are important. But we also get to look at the impact of our own perception and projection. It's the same story about half full, half empty. When there's an 8-ounce glass with 4 ounces of water, we interpret from the very particular orientations that we each have. And those projections shape our experience in a very, very real way. So to get back to this original idea of projection, let's look at ourselves in our lives to notice if there's a pattern in our relationships that repeats. It's the story really of wherever I go, there I am. That maybe we've created repetitive experiences with relationships, right? Like we're in a relationship and it's not a great relationship, and we end that relationship to go find another one, and there it is again, the same sort of dynamic or pattern. Oftentimes when we try to get away from something that we believe is external, we have the opportunity to discover that maybe it's not just external, because the common factor in all these situations is me. So when we allow ourselves to be present, what I'm referring to is moving away from the containers of judgment and interpretation to come more to a place of curiosity and question. So interpretation is answers, when we've made judgments, we've kind of made a determination, we've come to an answer to a question that we might not have even been aware we were asking, but we've closed the book on something. We've made a determination that's final. And then we act as though that's true, rather than being in an inquiry around it. So I was talking to another client who was saying this or that or the other thing about their spouse, and their spouse just being a certain way, and they had a judgment about that, and they were going to go to lunch, and I said, I know you think you know your spouse, but what if you were to be curious? What if you allowed yourself to not know and to be in a place of discovery and newness? What kind of possibility might that open up? What might arise? Because we think that what we know, or what we think we know, is true. You know, we make a judgment about someone and we think that that's the end of the story. It gives us a way to not be curious and sort of to close the book. You know, I can write off that inquiry because I already know this, that, or the other thing. And it's easy to fall into those kinds of traps. And it's a trap because there's a certain comfort to it. You know, we want to know the world we're in so that we can navigate it better. We don't want to spend every moment in wonder about the things that are common in our lives, because it would prohibit our productivity, perhaps. But what if we open the conversation? Like, we assume we know each other as human beings. And while somebody's behavior might be predictable about this, that, or the other, and we may have lots of evidence for how things are, when we stop being curious, we stop being able to be present. I'm thinking again, I was talking yesterday about the telepathy tapes, which I'm just enamored of and fascinated by, and how certain segments of people who consider themselves scientific or scientists are absolutely dismissing the phenomena that are being reported by so many people. And the foundational reason is because it doesn't jive with their perception of reality. So they're projecting their belief outwardly, saying that their belief is what's true, that their skepticism is the truth, because this thing doesn't align with their reality. And I think there's so much to discover that we don't know. We're learning so much that we don't know. And I get it. It can be very uncomfortable to be living in the unknown, to be being in a state of discovery all the time. But there's a vitality when we allow ourselves to connect with our curiosity. There's a vitality and possibility for learning something new, for emergence. And now more than ever, we need to be exploring and discovering new pathways, new solutions, new possibilities, new ways of being that can forward life, that can renew our vitality, that can bring new dynamics into the picture, that can offer us new pathways to address issues that some of which we've never faced together before. So, is it possible to live beyond projection? When we reflect, when we become curious, I think that we can find avenues into new perception and discovery that does indeed move us beyond projection. So it's worth a try, right? That's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's such a pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to share these morning musings on what it is to be human with you. So until